G'day. When we're talking about critical systems heuristics, we obviously are talking about Werner Ulrich from Switzerland. It's also important to realise that Werner Ulrich followed in the tradition of West Churchman, one of the pioneers in the field of systems thinking, or in actual fact, operations research. In order to understand a little bit about West Churchman, it's probably a good idea to talk a little bit about hard systems thinking. Hard systems thinking and operations research emerged in the 1930s and the 1940s. The term OR was coined in 1937 in the UK, and they represented ways of applying science and maths to what were effectively real-world problems. Particularly during the war, the Allies used operations research to maximise the bombing effectiveness and the efficiency of their radar networks. A parallel term emerged after the Second World War in the United States, and that was systems analysis. That was heavily promoted by the Rand Corporation after the war and became widespread in the defence and the aerospace industries, and we still use it today. In 1965, President Johnson mandated that systems analysis be adopted throughout all federal agencies, and on the wave of the 1960s, systems analysis was hailed as a modern breakthrough. We refer to that now as systems thinking, as hard systems thinking, I should say, but it was very much highly anticipated to deliver solutions to the real-world problems that the 20th century had served up. However, it wasn't universally received well. Acceptance was sort of limited and the perceptions were mixed. The reasons for this are varied. Certainly, hard systems thinking had difficulty handling problems with extreme complexity. It really was not able to accommodate for multiple beliefs or values or ethical positions. It failed to address issues of politics and power. It was not very effective at handling conflict. And fundamentally, and certainly what you would know from your reading of soft systems methodology, it was unable to incorporate the plurality of multiple perspectives. So hard systems thinking started to hit a little bit of a snag. At about the same time, well, I suppose the basis for hard systems thinking, philosophically, it's reductionist in its methodology, it's positivist from a paradigmatic point of view, it represents a functionalist view of the world that's primarily concerned with efficiency and effectiveness, and we get this from the paradigms that Mike Jackson presents. It assumes that quantitative data is sufficient for decision making. It assumes that the objects of inquiry are in actual fact quite controllable, and most importantly that the formulation of the problem was based on clear and agreed objectives. In other words, the problem existed, the system existed objectively and independently of observers in the real world. This suits technical systems, but it's not appropriate for human systems. So, the response was twofold. And it was driven by the nature of the problems of hard systems thinking that hard systems thinking was endeavouring to address, and it was driven by the nature of the methodology used to address the problem. So consequently, Checklin picked up the methodology, Churchman was involved in the response to the nature of the problems. So what we can see from this is the rise of what we now refer to as wicked problems. Wicked problems have got a very, very interesting origin, a very, very interesting beginning. In the 1960s, America was a country of extremes. The Vietnam War had started, and in parallel to the Vietnam War, John F. Kennedy had this large social mandate to put people up onto the moon. At the same time as the space race was gearing up, in parallel with the Vietnam War, there was the urban revolt and there was the civil rights movement. During this period of time, NASA gave West Churchman a grant to use operations research, because he was one of the very early pioneers in the field with Russ Ackoff, gave him a grant to explore the transfer of technology from the space program to the world of urban problems. So, with the Vietnam War waging on the international front and the extremes of the civil rights movement and the space race domestically, NASA gave West Churchman funds to explore ways that reflecting this as the anticipation or the promise of hard systems thinking, explore ways that they might be able to solve urban problems. What Wes Churchman did is he got a guy called Horst Riddle in at UCLA Berkeley in the College of Environmental Design, and they started to deliver weekly seminars. Now, one of these weekly seminars, Horst Riddle was presenting the attributes of some particular problems that they were facing in this public planning space. Firstly, he was asserting that the forming of the problem was actually interconnected with the solving of the problem. It was characterized by poor levels of information, frustrated by the fact that there were no tests for a particular solution. He recognized the fact that you couldn't unmake consequences from occurring. You didn't have a list of permissible operations or permissible alternatives that you could choose from. There were no particularly well-defined solutions. The whole field was characterized by conflicting values and opinions of the multiple stakeholders and the multiple participants. And it was to this that Wes Churchman in the literature is quoted as saying, those sound like wicked problems. And with that, the birth of wicked problems. However, it's very important to recognize in our bridge from wicked problems into Werner Ulrich and critical systems heuristics that Churchman also commented that OR, or hard systems thinking or systems analysis, of which he was one of the pioneers, had carved out a piece of the problem to what he said effectively tame the growl, but it had exposed a moral dilemma. And he concluded that whoever attempts to tame part of a wicked problem but not the whole is morally wrong. And it was at that point that he commenced his systems approach in response to the ethical shortfalls or the ethical challenges of hard systems thinking. So what we can see from this is that Werner Ulrich, who did his doctoral studies under Wes Churchman at UCLA, follows in an intellectual stream of people who are trying to address the fundamental ethical element of solving problems that hard systems initially promised to solve, but demonstrated that it was in actual fact unable to solve after a period of time.